For this chapter, I will cover sex, gender, and transgender material. During this chapter, we will cover some prenatal influences regarding sex and sex development, gender identity and development, both biological and social influences, as well as transgender issues. Genes and hormones guide sex development, and this not only occurs prenatally, but also throughout your life. Both males and females differ not only in their genitalia, but the amount of various hormones going through their body throughout their lifetime. These different hormone levels, as well as which are guided in part by genetic expression, guided in part through environmental influences, not only change genitalia, but probably the structure of the brain as well. And thus, since brain controls cognitive functioning, the way both genders tend to think. And again, that's tendency, it's not an absolute. Sex development may go awry, and awry is probably not the best word to use here. Awry in terms of what we would consider prototypical development. But there's a lot of ways in which development could occur, which is atypical, and depending on your view of atypical as well. Gender is definitely a central aspect of personhood. People tend to identify themselves immediately as male, female, transgender, clear delineations when we look at bathroom, driver license, whatever it is. It's a central aspect of who you are. Both biological and life experiences influence gender, and we will look at that. Early on, when we look at sex chromosomes determining development in the embryo, 2X determine female, embryo has 1Y, and 1X develops as a male, so it is the Y chromosome in essence that determines whether you're male or female. The book goes through several slides illustrating the fact that, in essence, when the embryo is in its beginning stages, they basically develop out of the same material. There are definitely differences in the brain structure and the chemistry between the two. Men's brains tend to be about 10% larger. That in no way means that they're smarter. It just is more mass there. And it's proportionate to their overall body size difference. Men tend to be larger than females. The connections between the right and left hemisphere are stronger for women. Connections within each side of the brain are stronger in men. So we could see even immediately, just looking at the physiology of the brain, that we're not wired the same. Men tend to use more of the right amygdala and women more of the left. And we can also see that men and women differ in terms of serotonin and dopamine production. And some of this is a byproduct of the circulating androgen levels that occur. What I find very interesting is that these pathways tend to work in a circular fashion. For example, the testosterone in males' testes helps formulate the structure of the brain, and same with women. For example, research strongly suggests that prenatal hormonal influences may have a major influence on sexual orientation. Not that it's the only important factor, but more and more research is pointing to that it's a critical factor. Some of this research has been done in rats because we can't necessarily do that in humans. But one of the models and a lot of the research that has been produced has been by Ingo Ward many years ago. What occurred is they noticed after World War II that a high proportion of young males in Germany were homosexual when they were raised up subsequently. And there's a lot of models or theories why that may occur. Is dad dead, no longer there as a social model? Is maybe there's not enough food and diet changes? Well, what she found is, at least in rats, it may be tied to stress. during a critical period for rats, which is the 18th day of development in the womb, that testosterone needs to go from the testes to the pup's brain to cause that area of the brain responsible for secondary sexual characteristics. Primary sexual characteristics are your genitalia. Secondary are orientation. So since the mother rat was stressed out, the estrogen would flood to the site of the pup, and testosterone was blocked. Thus, when these male pups were born, they tended to engage in more lordosis, i.e. being on the receiving end, or the female posture of wanting to be mounted, more than engaging in mounting. Now, male rats typically will do both, but these were particularly rats that tended to display I want to be mounted behavior. So what we find is several researchers, including Simon LeVay, have found, at least during autopsies of gay men, that areas in the brain may be differentiated and may look more like a typical female brain. These aren't absolute findings. Some people have criticized it for one reason or another, but more and more evidence is mounting that homosexuality or heterosexuality is not really a choice. You are born with a brain that is oriented toward one or the other, as well as bisexuality. And I'll turn back to that in a few more slides. Gender identity is a personal sense for which one belongs. Sometimes it matches and sometimes it doesn't match. So, for example, if I have male genitalia and I believe I'm a male and identify being a male, then my gender identity matches. Other people may feel that they are a woman trapped in a male's body. Therefore, the gender identity doesn't match their physical. Gender identity may be expressed via gender role behavior, clothing, talking, walking. But again, that's following general stereotypes of how men and women should act, and those are cultural expressions and may not be universal. Sexual orientation, again, may be very different. What we'll see, and as I will typically do through a lot of these slides, I will look at some of the evolutionary basis for these things. For example, some of the differences we find in men and women are differences in casual sex, jealousy, and things like masturbation. So some of the differences that occur in terms of cognition, men tend to score higher than women on verbal and physical aggression. Men are more inherently violent as a group, and it's probably an evolutionary adaptive trait. Since we were the aggressors, we were the ones going out and killing animals or defending the tribe. Women tend to show more interest in people and express more empathy on average. Men tend to be interested in things, which also can explain some of the differences in job choices. Guys are interested in how it works. Women are more interested in how you work and how you are. One of the big differences we find, men tend to be better at, for example, in mental rotation tasks. Being able to identify which of these possible candidates matches this one. Men and women differ in terms of how they navigate the world, in terms of reading maps or finding locations. Women tend to outperform men in things like face recognition. If you line up a series of faces, women are able to identify them much more than men. And we can see here from the eye tracking, women spend more time looking at various aspects of the face as opposed to men. Some differences in sex. Men report having a stronger sex drive. That could also in part be to women's unwillingness to report a high sex drive given cultural norms. Men expressive more permissive attitudes toward casual sex, but notice that when it comes down to having sex, obviously very often it takes two to tango, and there at least have to be quite a few permissive behaviors in women as well. But men still probably come out with a stronger sex drive. One point of evidence for this would be when we look at lesbian versus gay men. Gay men tend to have more partners than lesbian women on average. So even within the same grouping, same-sex groupings, we find these differences. Women are typically attracted to older partners. This is in part because they have gained more commodities and can provide a stronger nest or living environment. And men are attracted to younger ones because youth is a sign of reproductive abilities. And we see this kind of universal across all cultures. Men tend to be more concerned with the physical attractiveness of the partner. Women tend to be more concerned about other attributes in men, like their creativity, their intelligence, their ability to earn, being a major thing, and their sense of humor. It all depends how you look at the data. Both men and women say they want a partner who is funny, but what is interesting is men want someone who will laugh at their dumb jokes. Women want someone who will make them laugh, which is a sign of creativity and ability to get along with others, which leads to economic success. Some differences in sex. Women tend to experience emotional jealousy. A woman is more apt to be jealous that a man still keeps in touch with an old girlfriend. Men are more worried about sexual jealousy. Why? Well, a woman has to be worried that another woman steals her mate and thus all the resources. Men have to be nest guarders, and if a woman is having sex, his partner's having sex with somebody else, there's a chance she may conceive, and he has to bring up somebody else's child. We see this in many, many other species aside from humans. And we see this in humans quite a bit. It's estimated that between 5 and 10% of individuals, for example, in the U.S. and England, are bringing up a child who they think is theirs when in fact it's somebody else's. Men are more likely to engage in unusual forms of sexual expression. When you look at most atypical sexual behaviors, it's more men than women. Men get shoe fetishes, women don't. Men typically are the ones who are typically paying for sex. Women are the ones on the receiving end. It's a seller's and buyer's market. So, and we have very different sexual response cycles. Women can keep having sex and have multiple partners. Men usually have a refractory period where they have some downtime. Some of these gender differences are innate, as much as people try and point to other causes and it's all social. It's not. Some of it is social, some of it's inherent and innate. Male fetuses are more active in the womb. They're running around more, even 3 months of age. They show differences in toy preferences. Boys will look at typical boy toys more than girls. They will look at cars and trucks. They will tend to choose those more often. Girls tend to choose dolls. And this is regardless of socialization. And in fact, we see this not only in humans, we see this, for example, in other species. unless your argument is that girl chimps are socialized toward dolls and boy chimps are socialized toward cars and figuring out how they work, which I think is quite a silly argument. When we see these gender differences in other species and ourselves, they're probably inherent differences reflecting inherent differences between the two sexes. Some of the reasons this occurs, going back to evolutionary factors, casual sex is less costly for men than women. A man can have casual sex and walk away. The woman may end up with a lifelong commitment to the byproduct. And as I mentioned, jealousy is inherent relative to who fathered the child. We also see some of the cognitive differences may be to long-standing divisions of labor. Men were the hunters and also the protectors of the group, as I mentioned. Women had to multitask, bring up kids, clean, cook, do various other tasks. We see that this not only has changed the body, but what our inherent interests are and what our behaviors. And these became so normed in the species across hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that basically they are inherent to an extent. That doesn't mean that they're absolute across all individuals, but the general trend exists. We see some turn out to some other biological factors influencing gender. So I mentioned before that prenatal influences of androgens may influence outcomes in terms of sexual orientation. We see this particularly for some girls and some boys. That basically girls who are have an insensitivity or are exposed to a high level of testosterone, they tend to do more oriented towards sports, probably be more tomboyish. When boys are exposed to lower levels of testosterone, they tend to be more effeminate. So when we look at the types of toys, normal boys, normal girls, and then girls with different exposures, we see that the girls tend to emulate the boys. We can also look at this in terms of finger length ratio. One of the questions I often get in this class is there truth about gaydar? Well, there's some evidence that gaydar does exist. Some people have tried to point out the various signs, one of which is finger length ratio, which correlates to many gender characteristics. Males typically have a finger length ratio where the index finger compared to the ring finger, the ring finger is longer. For women, this tends to be more even between the two. Interestingly, for girls or women who had prenatal exposure to testosterone, it looks more along the male ratio. For males who lacked testosterone exposure and subsequently may be homosexual, it may be more even between the two fingers. So just like you don't choose your finger length, you don't choose your sexual orientation. It's not sexual orientation is causing it, but a third variable, prenatal influences to androgens that determine how your brain develops and thus how you think and behave is really what may be influencing some sexual orientation. It's not the entire story, but it's a significant part. Life experiences also influence, you are socialized to act in certain ways, and this is cross-cultural, mind you. There are some groups in the Pacific Ocean on islands where part of the socialization for young boys is to have sex with the older males and give them oral sex to up to a point, because drinking the semen makes them more masculine, is the belief. So there, to be a true man, you give oral sex to other men. Certainly not our model. And we see variations across. We can think about rewards and punishments that occur. People who are very invested in stereotypical gender identities may punish boys for acting effeminate, or reward one when they're acting tough and macho. As well as you look at things people buy. That's all fine. You can make your own life choices. But in essence, if your child is born gay, you're not going to be able to change them. You're not going to be able to change anyone's sexual orientation effectively. The research on that typically shows you have more negative outcomes than positive outcomes. There's really nothing you're going to do about it. Very often we follow sexual scripts from a young age all the way through dating. Men ask out women. Typically, women, even though we live in a rather liberal society, very rarely ask guys out. And when you ask women, they'll sheepishly go, "Oh, not really," or "Maybe I did once," or something. But typically, no. It's still guys' job to do that. When we look at other groups, one last group to focus on is transgender people, and we can look at this as part of society's deepest divide. Men and women have probably existed in all societies. We've always had transgender individuals. Here's a group of trans men, lady boys in Eastern culture. They're much more accepting. I believe Miss Universe a few years ago, they found out was transgender. If for individuals who go over for sex trade, you definitely have to look at Adam's apples and feet and finger length ratios to make sure what you're paying for, as well as chin size. These are all relevant telltale signs. Other times it's probably a little harder to tell. Transsexual individuals are of more than one kind. That you may go female to male, male to female, and that is completely different from transvestism, acting or dressing in a manner traditionally associated with the opposite sex. So wanting to dress like a man, wanting to dress like a woman, doesn't mean he wants to become a woman or change his sexual genitalia and do obviously what Bruce Jenner did. Completely different, but people are going through these surgeries, and we see more and more occurring these days. Becomes a big question. How should we treat gender dysmorphic children? As a parent, or if your child was intersexed, what would you do? Would you do sex reassignment surgery when they're young? And if you say wait, well, what happens then? What happens when they go to school and they have to choose one bathroom or the other? What do you do when you fill out the forms? So waiting has its own consequences. Some transgender people don't want surgery. They may say, fine, I'm transgender. Why should I even subscribe to this notion that I have to change and realign my body with my image? Gives you a freedom to be whoever, whatever you want, whenever you want. I will say, aside from Bruce Jenner's recent surgeries and public eye, they're struggling for acceptance, but we see more and more of this occurring.